Dust clouds billowed as the stagecoach wheezed to a stop before Willow Creek's trading post. Margaret Sullivan clutched her threadbare traveling bag, emotions warring within her, terror mingling with desperate optimism. At 43, with gray already streaking her dark hair, she hardly resembled the typical settler seeking fortune on the untamed frontier. Yet Margaret faced no alternatives. 8 months passed, she'd laid her husband to rest in Philadelphia, only to uncover the devastating financial ruin he'd concealed. Every possession had been auctioned to satisfy creditors. Now she found herself in this harsh frontier settlement, sustained only by a newspaper snippet preserved in her handbag. Circle M Ranch requires cook, lodging included. Contact Morrison's trading post, Willow Creek. The trading post reeked of grain, hide, and lamp oil. The gaunt proprietor pushed his glasses higher when she inquired about employment. That notice has lingered nearly 2 months, he said skeptically. Circle M lies 20 miles distant, unforgiving terrain, hardly appropriate for refined ladies. His eyes swept over her mourning dress, the sole reminder of her previous existence. I guarantee you, Mr. Morrison, I possess culinary skills. The declaration felt false on her tongue. Margaret had never once prepared bread in her former world of domestic staff and elegant soirees, yet desperation had emboldened her. Morrison's brow furrowed. Cooking isn't the sole challenge. Circle M houses only men. Jake Caldwell maintains strict order, but existence there proves harsh. 3 previous cooks departed within a month. I possess no alternatives, she confessed quietly. No relatives, no financial resources. This position represents my sole opportunity. Her sincerity moved him. He eventually agreed. My freight wagon departs at sunrise. Should you remain determined, accompany Pete, my driver. There's lodging available down the street tonight. Margaret released her breath, relief and anxiety intertwining. She purchased 2 simple cotton dresses, durable footwear, and a broad hat, attire suited for prairie life, not urban society. That evening in the boarding house, she absorbed the frontier's sounds. Boisterous voices from the tavern, horses shuffling nearby, a coyote's distant cry. She pressed the advertisement against her palm like a charm, whispering, I shall endure. Dawn brought a jarring wagon journey across endless golden grasslands. Upon passing through gates bearing the Circle M brand, her stomach clenched. The ranch occupied a broad valley. A timber main house, barns, corrals, bunkhouse, smokehouse, practical yet austere. No gardens, no curtains, no touches of comfort. Pete summoned Jake, and Margaret beheld him initially. Jake Caldwell appeared younger than anticipated, perhaps late 30s, towering and broad-shouldered, weathered by sun and labor. His steel-colored eyes examined her silently before he finally spoke. Ever prepared meals for 15 ravenous men, Mrs. Sullivan? Never, she replied truthfully, raising her chin, though I'm prepared to acquire the skill. This isn't a learning institution, he responded curtly. Rise at 4. Morning meal served by 5. Midday provisions packed for the hands. Evening meal ready at sunset. Bread, meat, coffee, strong enough to support horseshoes. You'll fetch water, process poultry, battle that stove daily. Margaret held his stare, voice unwavering. 3 months ago I interred my husband. 2 months passed, I liquidated everything to settle debts that weren't rightfully mine. 1 month ago I slept in a train depot because I lacked funds for proper lodging. Desperation, Mr. Caldwell, teaches thoroughly. For the first instance, something shifted in his expression. Perhaps surprise, possibly respect. You receive 1 week, he declared finally. Success means you remain. Failure means Pete escorts you back on his next trip. As she turned toward her belongings, his voice halted her. Another matter, Mrs. Sullivan. This kitchen requires more than sustenance. Life here proves demanding. Men strain their bodies out there while isolation gnaws at the soul. The previous cook served each meal as though attending a wake. I won't tolerate that again. His gaze locked with hers steadily. So inform me, can you infuse your cooking with joy? Margaret recalled her former existence, entertaining Philadelphia's social elite at dinner gatherings, maintaining composure through difficulties, dissolving tension with humor and grace. Gradually, she permitted herself the slightest smile. Mr. Caldwell, she said, if I could amuse 20 Philadelphia society ladies while serving charred beef, I believe I can manage a room full of ranch hands. For the first time, his mouth curved slightly upward. We shall discover. Supper at 6 precisely. You have 4 hours. The kitchen confronted her. A massive iron stove, a battle-scarred wooden workspace, shelves of beans, flour, salt, and a beef portion in lard. Margaret donned an apron and began. The stove produced smoke, the blades were blunt, the cookware too cumbersome. Her palms developed blisters, her eyes watered from smoke, and her stew constantly threatened to burn or chill. By evening she'd produced a stew pot, biscuits with blackened undersides, and coffee potent enough to dissolve paint. She stood trembling as 15 hungry men entered, tipped their hats respectfully, and consumed their meal silently. Jake occupied the table's head, his expression revealing nothing. Afterward, he gestured her outside. The prairie glowed amber in the twilight, but Margaret could barely breathe. The stew lacked seasoning, Jake stated directly. The biscuits proved dense, the coffee harsh. Her shoulders dropped. Then, surprisingly, his mouth twitched. Yet you persevered. You sought assistance. You attempted. That demonstrates wisdom. Relief flooded through her. So I may remain the week, he confirmed. Then gentler, recall my request? Food satisfies hunger, but joy nourishes something more elusive. My home has forgotten happiness. That evening, Margaret cleaned dishes with wounded hands and an aching spine. Yet, when she hummed an old hymn her grandmother once sang, she detected movement beyond the window. Jake Caldwell, pausing, listening, his expression unreadable, though his posture relaxed. Then he departed beneath the vast Texas stars, leaving Margaret with her first glimmer of optimism. Next morning, Margaret arose before daybreak. Her body protested, but she compelled herself into the kitchen. The air was crisp, the prairie still shrouded in darkness. She kindled the fire, ground coffee beans with trembling fingers, and set bacon crackling in the skillet. The cowboys shuffled in, yawning and rubbing their eyes. They assumed their places while Margaret served bacon, biscuits, and unevenly fried but warm eggs. She welcomed each man with a smile, addressing them by name after careful observation the previous evening. Morning, Hank. Coffee prepared strong, exactly as you prefer. Sam, extra bacon for you. The men appeared startled initially. Then one, a tall redhead, chuckled. Well now, isn't this different? The former cook never recalled anything about us. Margaret's smile broadened. The food remained simple, but genuine laughter circulated the table. When the men departed, Jake remained. He sampled a biscuit, chewed thoughtfully, then regarded her. Still heavy, he observed. Margaret stiffened. Perhaps you'd prefer preparing them yourself. Silence stretched between them. Then, to her amazement, Jake laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to dispel dust from the rafters. That's the attitude, he said. Maintain that spirit. The men valued determination over perfect biscuits. Days became weeks. Margaret mastered dough kneading until it achieved lightness, seasoning stew with meadow herbs, roasting chicken over open flames until the skin crackled. Her hands roughened, her back strengthened, but beyond food, she gifted the ranch something absent for years: warmth. She narrated stories while working, hummed melodies, gently teased cowboys arriving with muddy boots. She laughed at their humor, even the crude jokes, and gradually the bunkhouse grew livelier, brighter. One evening she presented a pie. Peach, she announced proudly, my first homemade pie. The men cheered, and when someone jested that she must have purchased it in town, Margaret brandished her spoon. I'll cuff your ears if you question my pie, sir. The room erupted with laughter, and at the table's head, Jake Caldwell observed her with an indecipherable expression. But the West never remained gentle long. One tempestuous night, news arrived of cattle thieves spotted near distant pastures. Jake saddled up with his crew, abandoning Margaret alone in the main house with only howling wind outside. Hours crawled past as she peered into the storm, praying for their safe return. When riders finally clattered through the gate, mud-splattered and exhausted, Margaret rushed to the porch. Jake dismounted, leading his men with weary eyes but uninjured. Relief overwhelmed her so completely she forgot propriety. You're unharmed, she whispered, her hand grazing his sleeve. Jake studied her, rain dripping from his hat brim, his jaw tense. For a heartbeat, his eyes softened in a way that caught Margaret's breath. But then he retreated. Coffee, he said curtly. The men are chilled. She complied, though her hands shook while pouring. That night, while the storm raged outside, Jake sat apart from others, staring into flames. Margaret wondered what spirits troubled him. Weeks became months. Margaret's presence became Circle M's heartbeat, yet questions persisted in her thoughts. Why did Jake, not yet 40, live solitary without wife or children? Why did his eyes grow shadowed whenever laughter filled rooms? And why, when her hand brushed his one evening as they passed dishes, did he recoil as though scorched? One night, unable to contain her curiosity, Margaret asked gently, "Mr. Caldwell, why do you shield your heart so carefully?" Jake's fork suspended midair. His gray eyes met hers, stormy and immovable. "Because, Mrs. Sullivan," he said quietly, "the last time I allowed someone close, it destroyed everything." The room fell silent, the men pretending not to hear. Margaret's chest constricted with questions, but Jake rose abruptly, abandoning his half-finished plate. For the first time, Margaret understood her battle wasn't merely with recipes and laughter. It was with the wounds Jake carried deep within, wounds that might never mend. Still, the ranch flourished under her care. When calves were born, she baked celebration cakes. When men returned from long drives, she performed old songs by lamplight. She introduced small pleasures into their harsh lives, and gradually Circle M began feeling like home. But as autumn painted the prairie golden, a letter arrived that would test everything Margaret had constructed. Jake delivered it at supper, his eyes unreadable. The envelope bore Philadelphia's mark. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside were words threatening to drag her back to the existence she'd escaped. Unsettled debts, relatives demanding her return, and claims that her deceased husband had concealed money in her name. Margaret's vision clouded as the men awaited her words. She sat frozen, torn between the past she'd fled and the fragile new life she was building. When she finally looked up, Jake's gaze remained steady, hard yet filled with something else, something resembling fear. "You must decide, Margaret," he said quietly. "Where do you belong?" The room stilled. The fire crackled. Outside, prairie wind whispered. Margaret clutched the letter in trembling hands, knowing whatever choice she made would alter everything. "Hold on. Before we continue, what are your thoughts on the story thus far? Share your comments below. I'm genuinely curious about your perspective." Margaret barely slept that night. The letter rested folded on her bedside table, its contents weighing heavily on her heart. Philadelphia beckoned with promises of hidden funds that might eliminate her debts. Yet returning also meant confronting the city that had claimed her husband and security, the city that had witnessed her fall from prosperity to disgrace. At dawn, she discovered Jake already outside, leaning against the corral fence. His hat shadowed his eyes, but she knew he hadn't slept either. "Have you chosen?" he asked quietly without turning. "I'm uncertain," Margaret whispered. "Part of me wishes to return and resolve everything. And another part fears losing what I've discovered here." Jake's jaw clenched. "Philadelphia holds no place for you now, but I cannot dictate your decision. That choice remains yours." She longed for him to say more, to plead for her to stay, but his silence left her alone with her thoughts. The following days proved tense. Circle M's men avoided the topic, though their concerned glances weighed heavily. Margaret continued cooking and smiling, but her laughter wavered at the edges. One evening, as she served supper, Jake finally spoke. "I lost my wife to fever 5 years ago," he said, voice low, eyes fixed on his plate. The men fell silent. She was the final person who brought joy into this house. After her passing, the place grew cold. I vowed never to hope again. Margaret's hand froze on the serving spoon. His words sliced through the air like a blade, raw and vulnerable. "I hired cooks because the men needed meals," Jake continued. "But you brought something I never requested. You made this place live again." His voice faltered. "And now you speak of departing." Her throat tightened. For the first time, she witnessed the burden he carried, not just as a rancher, but as a man who had built barriers too high around his heart. That night, Margaret walked into the prairie alone. The sky blazed with stars, the land stretching endlessly around her. She thought of Philadelphia with its cobblestones and fine carriages. She thought of Circle M with its dust, laughter, and rough men who had become family. And she thought of Jake Caldwell, who sought not only food but joy, a man requiring healing as much as she did. By morning, her decision crystallized. At breakfast, Margaret stood before the table. The men looked up, forks paused midair. Jake's gray eyes met hers, guarded as always. "I received correspondence from Philadelphia," she said, her voice steady now. It mentioned debts and possible money. But nothing remains for me there. What I possess exists here. I choose to stay, a murmur swept the room. The men cheered softly, relief brightening their faces. But Margaret only observed Jake. For a long moment, he remained silent. Then slowly he rose from his chair, stepping close enough that she could see the storm in his eyes beginning to break. "You'd abandon everything back east?" he asked. "I already have," she answered. "But here I possess something I never expected. A home, a family, and perhaps—" Her voice softened. "Perhaps more." The silence between them stretched until Jake finally reached out, his hand covering hers on the table. "You've infused this place with joy, Margaret," he said. "And you've touched my heart as well." Her breath caught. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt warmth beyond mere survival, something resembling love. The ranch flourished in subsequent months. Margaret's cooking became skilled, her laughter brighter. The men teased her like a sister while protecting her like family. And though Jake Caldwell remained a man of few words, his eyes softened whenever she entered a room. One evening, as the sun descended low and the land glowed golden, Jake took her hand on the porch. "This place nearly destroyed me," he said quietly. "But you restored it. Stay with me, Margaret. Not as my cook, as my partner." Tears stung her eyes, but she smiled through them. "Yes, Jake, I will." The prairie winds swept around them, carrying laughter from the bunkhouse, the sound of cattle calling, the promise of new days. Together they stood at Circle M's heart, two souls battered by loss, but no longer alone. And in that wild land where life proved hard and happiness rare, a widow and a cowboy discovered both refuge and love, not just in walls and meals, but in joy that mended their wounded hearts.